All right, so our trees are dry, and one thing I wanted to mention after I turned the camera off, I made my green slightly darker just to put on top of the center one here, just to give it some divide from the two beside it. I didn't turn the camera back on because my furnace had decided to come on, but I just wanted to mention that. So those are slightly darker, not because they really needed to be, but because they were kind of blending into the two trees. So now I'm ready to add my heron and my eagle. So I've got my images printed off. You're going to want to change your scale to whatever fits with your painting, and this is from the instruction sheet. The website has, or I've got the website listed there that you can use if you want to change your animals to suit where you live or whatever. So here is an inexpensive way to transfer this image onto here in order to paint it. You're going to get some chalk, and I'm doing the chalk because I'm working on a darker area. If by chance you had a soaring eagle or a soaring bird and you wanted to do it on a lighter area, that's where the charcoal would come in. So I'm just going to go on the side, and I'm going to get a good amount behind my heron there. I'm going to place him where I want him to go in my water. And then I'm going to take a pencil. You could use a stylus, you could use a pen. It doesn't really matter what you use. You just want to make sure it's got a fine point on there so that you can pencil in all the details. Whoops. Get my brush a little wet. Here is where you're going to need a really fine brush, especially for these bird images, because they're very, very tiny. So you want to make sure that you have a fine brush in order to get fine details. If you have a fine image and you end up having a brush that's too thick, it's not going to look quite as nice as you're going to want it to look. And by using the chalk, you don't get a really, really dark line, but it's enough that you can paint your image in. And I'll typically go and I will outline over where my image is, and then I will fill in the details. If by chance when you are done painting you see a little tiny bit of your chalk, super easy to just go, once everything is dry, with a damp cloth and wipe it off. And same with your charcoal. You could use graphite paper or carbon paper if you can find it. There's no one in our town that has any in stock right now, which is why I don't have any. And to order it online, I needed to order 100 sheets, and I only need one. So I've got that one there, and I should have done this before time so that I don't have my paper in my wet paint over there, but, and I've got my eagle. And I chose to have an eagle kind of soaring, picking up fish from the water for this one. When I had planned this project, I intended in my head to have an eagle sitting in a tree. But once I painted my trees, there wasn't really a spot to put it in that I thought you could see a nice silhouette. So I decided this one was perfect for what I was doing and for where I live, because this is something that we see quite regularly. When we go down to the beach, we see eagles regularly going in and scooping up their dinner. All right, so I'm going to leave those alone for now, let that dry. I want to make a bit of a gray color, and I'm going to, actually no, before I do that, I'm going to make the gray color just because I got my brush out here. That's going to be for a little bit of highlight on the rocks, but the one thing I want to do before that is I want to add a few pebbles into my water. So I'm taking my fine brush again. Wherever you want them to go, there's no rhyme or reason to this. It's just normal for, especially for us here, to see a few rocks jutting out of the water. Especially if you're on one of the rocky beaches. And you want to make sure you make different sizes of them. You don't want to have all the same, exact same size, exact same shape rock. And just make sure when you're painting them that the bottom is flat, because that's, If it was sitting in water, the bottom would be flat. There we go, and I've only got one on that side, so I'm just going to add a couple more. Some can be going behind the trees. This is a step that you could have done earlier, but I waited till now because I kind of wanted to see exactly where my trees and bushes are going to end up, because even as much as I try to plan things, I'll often change my mind while I'm painting just because things develop in a different way. So before I do the highlighting, simply because those rocks that I painted will be a little bit on the wet side right now and I don't want to start adding highlight to them, I'm going to just add a touch of white paint to a smaller brush, and I'm just going to add little bits of white around where the feet of the deer are, where the feet of my blue heron are, just because if they were sitting in water there would be just a little bit of water crashing against that, and then to where my eagle is picking up its meal. Just a touch, it doesn't need to be much, just a little bit. Same as if you were having them stand on the ground, you'd kind of have a little bit of a shadow or whatnot. If you find there's too much of a line, once you've rinsed your brush off, you can blend out the bottom. I actually quite like the way that those ones turned out, so I'm going to leave them as is. Now I'm going to take my fine brush, just because my rocks are fairly tiny. I'm going to take that gray that I just made, and it already pretty much started drying on my mat here, but I'm going to put a little tiny bit on the top of my rock, just a touch. It doesn't need to be a whole lot. And then a little bit on the rocks on the shore. Now you see why we didn't add the highlight before. You could have added the highlight before to the rocks on the shore, but you don't really know what you actually see and what's actually necessary, so I kind of wait for that. Dampen my big brush here, tiny little bit on the side, and I'm just going to blend that out a little bit. It ended up drying quite a bit faster than I wanted it to, so it's not really blending out as much, but I can take a brush that's a little bit smaller so I can have more control, and I can blend it out there. You could also, if you wanted, do each rock individually so that you have the control so that your paint doesn't dry on you, but because there's so little difference between the black and the gray, it's not something that is super noticeable if by chance it dries up before. Put a tiny little highlight on the back of the heron here. I'm going to do one on the deer too. You might, for the deer, you might actually want to create a brown because it's a little bit more accurate for their coloring, at least their coloring here, but I'm just gonna, it's just very subtle, it's not a whole lot. So my very last step, take my wide brush here, make sure that it's not too wet. You'll see on the edges here how we've gotten paint down the side. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to just go side to side up to the edge because I don't want to have a ridge of paint that goes over the top. I need more of my black. Just because we want our canvas to have a nice finished edge. You could, if you want, while you're doing your painting, wrap your image around the sides, but some of the parts are a little bit more difficult to do that than others. And I just found a black edge just gave it a really nice finished look. All right, you're gonna do that on all 4 edges. Finished West Coast acrylic landscape.